What are our transactions? Insert is a transaction, update, delete, select, commit, rollback. These all are the transactions. If you want to handle those transactions, we are going to use the AM, application module. So we don't write any logic in the AM. Maximum is required, whatever Oracle has written. We'll just create a AM. We'll just create a AM. Our main objects are these two, entity object and view object. Okay. So if you want to select the data, create a view object and write select statement. You want to do any DML operations, let's go for entity object. Okay. Next, that is what model. That is what model. Next, view. View is nothing but your user interface, end user interface. What is going to see? That we are going to use user interface XML model, user interface XML model, and we are going to design the view. Then what is controller? Controller is nothing but your code. Controller is nothing but your code, your Java class. When user click the button, I want to execute some code. When user click the button, I want to execute some code. When user check the checkbox, I want to execute some code. So if you want to do that, we'll go for controller. We want to do that, we'll go for controller. Okay. Fine. These are the three components. We have model, view, controller. Okay. Next, interaction between model, view and controller. How the system is going to interact between model, view and controller. This is your view and this is your controller and this is your model. Just now we discussed in the model what you will find: AM, entity object, view object. These are the three BC4J components we have in the model. And controller is nothing but your Java class, controller class, nothing but a Java class. View is nothing but your page, front end, HTML page, front end, HTML page. Okay. Now here is your database. Here is your database. Okay. So what user is going to do? User is going to open the HTML page, and whenever he clicks some request, your controller will be executed. It will connect to the AM. AM will be connected to the view object and retrieve the data from database and select the data. Through controller, it is going to display in your page. Through controller, it's going to display in your page. Okay. In case if you want to make some DML operations, then entity objects will be created. Entity object will be created. Okay. So here these arrow marks are very important. If you look at here, once user click this request controller class, let's say you are not working with the database. It means you are not selecting any data. If you are not selecting any data, you don't require any model. We don't need any database tables or something. So from the controller itself, it's going to be open some messages or something. If you want to select the data or any insert, update or delete, then you have to connect with the model. You have to connect with your model. Okay. So here if we look at this, controller can access only AM. Controller can access first AM. From the AM, you can access the view object. You cannot access entity object directly. See here, you don't have any connection directly from AM to entity object. From the AM, you have to connect to the view object. From the view object, you are going to connect to the entity object. From the entity object, you are going to apply your DML operations on the database. Okay. Sometimes what happened, I don't want entity object. Let's say I'm selecting the data. I'm not doing any DML operations. If you are selecting the data, what happened? Only view object will be created. Only view object will be created. That view object is going to select the data from database and it's going to retrieve, and that information is coming into your page through this process. Okay. So here, whenever you start writing the Java code, first you have to access the AM. Without accessing the AM, you cannot work with any entity object or view object. First we have to access what is the AM is assigned to your page. Next you have to find what are the view objects are available in your AM. Nothing but what are the queries are available in the AM. Either one query or multiple queries can exist. Okay. From there, you are going to select the data. In case if entity object is created, for example, definitely for every entity object, one view object will be created. For every entity object, one view object will be created. So view objects are two types. View objects are two types. One is select statement. Another one is EO based. Another one is EO based. Okay. So sometimes you want to just select the data, just we will create a view object. We don't work with the entity object. You want to develop the data entry page. Then what we have to do? We have to create a entity object, nothing but a table. Entity object is nothing but a table. We don't find any other logic here. Entity object, one entity object is nothing but one table indirectly. For entity object, we are going to create the view object. You must create a view object for EO. We must create a view object for EO. Then attach this view object to AM. Then AM will be accessed from the class. This class is connected with your page. Whenever user open the page, click some actions, nothing but click the button, click the checkbox. Then what happened? Your class will be executed internally. Your code will be executed. And this code you are going to access AM. If only view object is there, select and display the data. If entity object is there, then go for apply the DML operations. Okay. So this is your view, controller and model. In the view, we don't find any logic here, just designing front end, UI, user interface, and model also we don't find much logic. If at all is there any logic, that is your select statement. View object is nothing but your select statement. Entity object is indirectly table. So AM is to handle your transactions. If you look at from the class, you can access only AM directly. You cannot access view object or entity object directly. First you have to access the AM. Then inside of that AM, what are the view objects are there that you can access. And is there any entity object VOs? Entity object VOs. So if you create an entity object, immediately you have to create a view object for that. Otherwise you cannot. Otherwise we cannot access from the AM. So in AM also we don't write any logic. That is one of the layer between your class and view object. Class and view object. This is our database. If you create a select statement, it will be executed and select the data, and that will be retrieved and it's going to display on your page. Same thing entity object also. Fine. So this flow is very important. This particular diagram is very important. Interaction between model, view and controller. How it is going to be interact. These arrow marks are very important here. Yes. If you look at entity object must be associated with view object, and view objects will be assigned to AM. AM can be accessed from the class. Class will be attached to the page. Okay. So these are three model, controller and view. Next, if we go to the next page, now we are finding the definition of what is meant by entity object, what is meant by view object, what is meant by AM, what is meant by controller. These are we are going to find. These are we are going to find. We are going to find the definitions for all this. First, entity object. Entity object is based on the database table. That's what we have discussed. Entity object means indirectly database table or data source. Data source means it may be a view also, or it may be materialized view also, or it may be a synonym also. Okay. So it can be either table or view or materialized view or synonym. It can be any of that. Okay. Entity object contains the attributes, nothing but a columns. Entity object contains the attributes. Attributes are nothing but columns. All insert, update, delete transactions to go through EO2 database. Whenever you want to do DML operations, that must go through the EO2 database. Without EO, you cannot apply DML operations on your database table. Through EO only you have to apply all this. That's why here you can see through entity object only all your DML operations will be applied. Yes. Okay. So that is about entity object. Okay. That is about entity object. Next, view objects. View objects are two types, SQL based, EO based. SQL based means select statement. When you are developing search pages, I don't want to insert, update, delete the data. I want to just select the data from database and filter it and show to the user. So search pages. Then we will go for SQL based. Then EO based. If we look at here in our diagram, once you create entity object, you cannot attach directly to AM. You must create one VO for your entity object. So that can be attached. That can be attached to AM. That can be attached to AM. So VOs are how many types? Two types. SQL based, another one is a EO based. It represents a query result. It represents a query result, nothing but a select statement. It represents a query result. What is the purpose of view object? If you want to join the tables and get the data, filtering, projecting and sorting your business data. When you want multiple data, for example, I want the purchase order data. Then what you have to do? You have to write a query. Nothing but you have to write a view object. You have to write a view object. It can be used on any number of entity objects and provide access to entity objects. We can have multiple view objects and multiple entity objects in our model. Fine. So that is about view object. Now we discussed what is entity object, what is view object. Now we are going to discuss what is AM. AM is nothing but application module. AM is nothing but application module. It contains only view objects. AM contains only view object. If we look at the diagram here, what are the things you are attaching to AM? Only view objects you are attaching to AM. You are not attaching to the EO. EO is not attached to the AM directly. For EO, you have to create one VO, view object, then attach this to the AM. Then attach this to the AM. Every page must have one root AM. Every page. When you develop any page, one root AM is mandatory. We can have multiple AMs also. Generally, we don't get requirement to go ahead with multiple AMs. Okay, one application module is enough. Sorry, one AM. It handles the transactions. So if you are developing any OAF page, it is mandatory that you must create a AM. Without class also you can develop a page. Controller is not mandatory. Controller when we will use whenever you want to write a logic. For example, just I want to show some information, static. I don't want to show any data or logic. Then we don't need controller. Just develop the page, design the page, design the page and create AM. If you want to talk with your database, then you have to go for view object and entity object. Otherwise, not required. Okay. So page is mandatory and AM is mandatory. That is application model. It handles our transactions. So what AM will do? Generally in the interview questions they will ask you what AM will do. It will handle our transactions. What are the transactions? DML transactions, select statements, commit, rollback. These all transactions can be handled through the AM. You want to issue the commit through AM only, you have to issue the commit. Next, this is the architecture of MVC. This diagram you can leave it. When we are developing the page you can easily understand. And controller. What is controller? It responds to user actions and directs application flow. And directs application flow. If we look at in our Oracle applications, what are the OAF pages we have seen so far in P2P cycle and O2C cycle? Supplier page is OAF, buyer's page is OAF, customer page is OAF. Yes. We have 70% of D2K forms, 30% are OAF pages. Okay. But still, then why we are learning OAF, why we are not learning D2K forms is, if any new requirement comes for the client, they are not asking us to develop the D2K form, which is outdated. Now clients are looking for the OAF pages. That's why we are learning the OAF pages. But 90% of the clients are looking for OAF pages. Maybe 10% of clients, they can ask D2K forms also. This is D2K form. This is our D2K form. Now, whenever we go to some module, let's go to purchasing module. I'm going to open buyer form, setup, personal, setup, personal, buyers. Now here, I'm going to enter some data and I'm going to click this button. When you click this button internally, some code will be executed. That's nothing but a controller. That's nothing but a controller. When you click this button, you are getting some new record here. Internally, some code has executed. That is what controller. So what controller will do, it responds to user actions. User action means this. You have clicked the button. That is action. That is a action. It responds to user actions and directs application flow. Direct application flow. Application is nothing but your page. Your page is nothing but application, and it will direct to your application. Okay. If I click this clear button, what happened? Data is cleared. If I click cancel button, now the information has been cancelled here. Okay. That record has been cancelled. Okay. So it responds to your user actions and directs to your application flow. Okay. So in the controller, we will find model object like entity object and view objects cannot be accessed directly. From the controller, you can access only AM. From the controller, we can access only AM. See, you are in controller, means you are in Java class, you are writing the code. When you are writing the code, first what you have to do, you have to know what is your AM. That you have to access. Then you have to know what are the view objects are there in the AM. View objects are nothing but a queries. Then whatever query you want to execute, that you can execute. Whatever query you want to execute, that you can execute. So from the controller, you can access only AM directly. Indirectly, you can access VO and EO. First, once you access the AM, then inside of AM, whatever view objects are there, that we are going to select. Okay. So directly we cannot access the view object or entity object. You can access only AM first. Then you have to go with the view object. That is controller. Okay. Model objects like EO and VO cannot be accessed directly from the controller class except AM. Next, what this controller contains? It contains methods. Controller means Java class, right? Classes contains the methods. Java class, it contains the methods. It contains the methods. It contains the methods. How many methods we have in the controller? There are 3 methods, but we are able to see now here only 2. Process request, process form request. One more is there, process form data. One more is there, process form data. There are 3 methods in your class. There are 3 methods in your class. in your controller. Controller means indirectly class, Java class. Controller means indirectly it is a Java class. It contains three methods. It contains three methods. Process request, process form request. One more is process form data. One more is process form data. So we don't write any logic in the process form data. We don't write any logic in the process form data. That is for cache purpose. That is for cache data purpose. That we'll discuss theoretically later. We don't do any practicals in the process form data. In the process form data method, we don't write any logic. We cannot write any logic. Okay. So only two methods we will be working mainly: process request, process form request. When this method will be fired, like in PLSQL, you have seen the triggers, right? The triggers will be fired automatically. The triggers will be fired automatically. Here also, these methods will be fired automatically. This process request will be fired when the OAF page loads for the first time. Whenever you open the OAF page, first time, that method will be fired. When the page is open, whatever code you have written inside of the process request method, that will be executed when the page is open. When user click the button, then process form request. When user click the buttons or when user click these options, then process form request. Then process form request. There are only two methods in the class: process request, process form request. Process request will be fired when the OAF page loads for the first time. When the OAF page loads for the first time. Process form request method fires when user submits the page. Nothing but when user clicks some buttons, or when user clicks some checkboxes, or when user clicks some LOVs. That time this second method will be fired. So you want to write a logic, only two options you have. When you want to execute your logic, when the page is loaded or when user click the button. Only two places you can write a logic. Button means you might be having multiple buttons. Here go button is there, clear button is there, add buyer button is there. This one also we have LOV button. Okay. Like this we have the multiple options, right? You can write for each button. You can write for each button, each checkbox, each icon. You can write the logic. Okay. So two methods we have. One is process request, another one is process form request. Process request method fires when OAF page loads for the first time. Process form request fires when user submit the page. When user submit the page. Okay. So one more method, what is that? Process form data. Process form data, it takes the information into cache. That we'll discuss later theoretically. We don't do any practicals in process form data. We'll write here only. Here only. Okay. So in controller, there are three methods total: process request, process form request, process form data. These are two methods we are going to use. Fine. Next. Then how your controller class is executing. This is a continuation for previous slide. When user click this page and browser send the request to the controller, in the controller you might have written logic to select some database tables or queries that it will connect to database. Sometimes I don't write any database related. Just I want to show some calculations. I am not selecting any database data. Then it will directly viewed. So from the controller, if you are working with model, it connects to here, otherwise it will be displayed here. Okay. Next. This is the MVC architecture. This is the MVC architecture. Here we can see that view, nothing but your page. Controller, how many methods it is showing? Two methods. Okay. Then what about model? Model contains your view object, your entity objects, right? And your AM, application module. Application module. Internally you can find your database. Internally we can find the database. And why we required entity object reading and writing. Generally for reading we go for view object, select statement. When you want to write nothing but insert, update, delete, then we go for entity object. Okay. So this is our architecture. Next. OAF framework is having the onion architecture. If you see the onion, how it looks like, it will have the layers, right? Same way here also. OAF framework can be extracted into series of concentric layers. Series of concentric layers like a onion. Each layer only knows about the layers below it. Okay. So what is the lowest layer? Database. Then entity objects. Then view objects. Then application module. Then controller. Then controller. Okay. So whenever we want to select the data from the controller, we will directly go to view object. View object means select statement. Your select statement directly retrieves the data from database. Directly retrieves the data from database. If you want to push the data, means you want to insert, update and delete, then we will go from controller to view object to entity object to database. When you are selecting the data, we don't want entity object, right? Only view object is enough. View object is enough. That view object directly interact with your database and select the data, and it will be showing in our page. Okay. Then when you are inserting the data, push, then what we'll do, this controller will write a view object and entity object, and then it will be connected with our database. Okay. Fine. Each layer only knows about the layers below it. About the layers below it. For example, you are in entity object, then you will be knowing only about database. If you are in view object, you will be knowing about entity object as well as the database object. If you are in AM, then you will be knowing about view object, entity object and database. If you are in controller, then you will be knowing your AM, view object, entity object and database. Okay. Each layer only knows about the layers below it. For example, you are in view object. From here you cannot go for AM or controller. You will find only below layers. You will find only below layers. Okay. So this is the onion architecture for OA framework. These are the profile options we are going to use to personalize our OAF pages. This will discuss in the OAF personalizations, no problem. Next, versions of the JDeveloper, JDeveloper 9i and 10g, and this we are using. We don't find much difference versions. Okay. Then what is the JDeveloper structure? First we have to create a Java workspace, JWS file, Java workspace. Inside of that we'll create a projects. Inside of that we'll develop the pages. One project means either one page or multiple pages. One project means either one page or multiple pages. JPR, Java project. JPR stands for Java project. JWS, nothing but a Java workspace. Nothing but a Java workspace. Okay. So inside of that we will find either one page or multiple pages. Okay. So first we will create one workspace. Inside of that we'll create one project. Inside of that we'll go for development of the pages. Inside of that we'll develop the pages. Okay. Fine. Workspace generally we don't create multiple. Generally there will be only workspace. Project also you will find only one project. You will develop the multiple pages. You will develop the multiple pages. Okay. Whenever we develop the page, we must keep the page in .webui folder. In this folder only you have to keep our all pages. Then when you are creating the view object or application module, this must be on the .server folder. View objects and entity objects must be on the server folder. Sorry, view objects and AM application module must be on the dot server. Entity objects will be on the dot schema dot server. So we have three folders: dot web UI, dot server, dot schema dot server. Pages must be placed on the dot web UI folder. Very important. View objects and AM must be placed on the dot server folder. Entity object must be placed on the dot schema dot server. So mainly we have three folders: web UI, server, dot schema dot server. Here pages, web UI. Web UI stands for web user interface. Web UI nothing but a web user interface. Web user interface. View objects and AM must be in the dot server. This must be on the dot server. Entity objects must be on the dot schema dot server. Entity objects must be on the dot schema dot server. Fine. Next. This anyway we'll discuss here. This all we'll design. We'll create first workspace. Then we'll create the project. Dot schema dot server contains entity objects. Okay. Dot server contains view object and AM. Web UI contains the pages. This all will find here. Okay. Fine. So that anyway we'll see. Now I'll just show you a simple JDeveloper tool, how it looks like. Open the JDeveloper. MAF stands for Mobile Applications Framework. The same JDeveloper tool we will use to go with MAF also. OAF pages, ADF pages, MAF pages. All these three will do by using the same tool. If you learn the OAF, remaining things can be easily learned, ADF and MAF. Oh. Fine. This is the JDeveloper tool. So whatever we have seen so far, that is architecture, MVC architecture, model, view, control. In the model, we'll find BC4J components. What are BC4J components? Entity object, view object, and application module. 3. Then controller and class. Okay. Fine. Now this is the JDeveloper environment. Go to view menu, structure window. Go to view menu, structure window. The structure window is used to define our OAF structure. Nothing but our pages, our view objects, entity objects, application module, all this will do in the structure window. Go to view menu, hierarchy. Whenever you select some object, what is the hierarchy in that object? For example, you have selected AM, then here you can see what are the view objects are available in that AM. If you select view object is nothing but a select statement. It will show here what are the columns you are available in the view. For example, you have selected the page, then it will show you what are the items are available in the page. Items are nothing but a buttons or text items or check boxes or radio buttons. This all we call it as a items. That. So hierarchy window will show you what are the objects are available in the selected component. Selected component. View menu, property inspector. This is normal property class. We have seen already in the report builder. Property palette, same. Whenever you select the object, it will show right side that particular object properties. View menu, log. This is nothing but your log information. When you run the page or when you compile the page, then it will show you warning messages in case if there are any warning messages or any errors are there, and it will also show you output debug messages. Any debug messages you have written, that also will find in the log window. Then where do you find the controller? Controller, you have to open it. If you open the controller, then only you can see that. Okay. So let me open one project. If we want to close this windows, we can close. Total 5 windows will be using mainly. First window is a structure. And let me open one window here. Folder, go to open. This is your controller here. Okay. So now this is our structure window. And here we'll find this is our controller. View menu, hierarchy. This is hierarchy window. View menu, property inspector. This is property inspector window. View menu, log. This is our log. Total 5. Property inspector will set the properties. Display property, enable, width, size, data type, column name. Okay, prompt. This all will configure. Log window will just show the log information. Then hierarchy window, we have nothing to do. Whenever you select object, then it will shows what are the sub objects are available in that. That is a hierarchy window. That is a hierarchy. Then inside of your controller will go for write our logic. Okay, fine. Now if you want to full screen any window, double click. If you double click, that screen will be full. Even log file also double click this. Again, if you double click, it come back to the normal position. For this double click, property inspector is full window. Again double click, it come back to this also. If we want to go for full screen, double click and come back to the normal position, again we have to come back. Okay, fine. So this is just environment, how it looks like. Total 5 windows will be using in the JDeveloper. 5 windows: structure window, hierarchy, controller, property palette, and another one is a log window. This one. You can configure according to your require. You can just drag and drop, and wherever you want to show, you can show that. But general option is this. Just you left click here, drag it, and once come into this place, leave this. Okay, fine. So here, hierarchy, structure, log, and controller and property. Fine. So you can go through this. Tomorrow we'll go for development of pages. We'll develop around 10 pages, OAF new pages. By that time maximum you will be clear how to develop. If you start practicing, OAF is very easy. If you are not practicing, then OAF is very complex. I'm very clearly telling you. If you are right from the first class, by tomorrow if you come to the class, you must know what is entity object, what is view object, what is AM, what are BC4. All these video files are uploaded in our Facebook. Already I have shown you. Okay, so let's connect to the Facebook, RTL Technologies. Go to the page, RTL Technologies, Facebook/RTL Techs or RTL Technologies. So the first class today, it will be again loaded, so you can go through that. So complete OAF classes are uploaded here. Each and every class will be uploaded, whatever we are discussing in our class, because OAF at least 2-3 times you have to listen the class, then only you can easily practice it. Okay, number of times you listen the class and number of times you practice, then it will be flexible. Okay, without OAF it is very difficult to get the calls in the current scenario. It is mandate. Okay, and it is easy. It's if you do the practice, whatever I am explaining in the classroom, make it perfect. We don't want beyond this. We don't need any questions beyond that. You don't need either not only interview or not only in the project. Whatever the knowledge I am sharing in my classroom, if you are perfect that knowledge theoretically and practically, you can easily clear your interview. You can easily work in your project independently. You don't need to depend on anyone else. Okay. So many people will be telling OAF is complex and all. That is because of their lab problem. They have not practiced well. They have not invested the time on the lab. They have not invested on the OAF is not something a theory part. It's purely practical. It's purely practical. Okay. So you must sit and do the practice. Okay, fine. So tomorrow we'll start the simple page. Tomorrow we'll start the simple page. Yes.